Welcome back. Well, it was 3 years ago that I sat here and I extolled the virtues of the 270 Winchester. And when I did, I described it being how Winchester had taken the 30-06, necked it down, and lengthened it slightly to preclude chambering, and thus was born a new cartridge in 1925. Well, that started off a bunch of comments that I get on a regular basis now from people who correct me that it was actually a development from the 3003 cartridge. Well, I want to sit here and tell you why that's not true, and in fact what really is behind the whole story. First of all, the 3003 was never a cartridge that was ever manufactured. It was only an arsenal production for the military, and it only lasted for about a year. Even though there's a 3-year span between the introduction of the 1903 model rifle and the 1906 model cartridge, even though there was a 3-year span there, the actual time that the 03 version of the cartridge was in use was only for about a year, a little over a year. And that original cartridge was a 220 grain ball cartridge that slugged out at only 2,300 feet per second and was vastly improved by going to a 150 grain bullet 3 years later that traveled at 2,700 feet per second. And the reason that was done was because we were trying to keep in step with, basically there was a firearms race at the time. There was a munitions and arms race with us and the Germans. The German technology was vastly ahead of us. We found that out in the Spanish-American War when, generals were complaining that, officers were complaining that their 30-40 Kriegs were being decidedly outshot by the 7x57 Mauser, which was being used against them, much flatter trajectory and all that stuff. So what followed was quite logical. It's pretty easy to reverse engineer a cartridge. You just pick up the enemy's cartridge. You say, gee, that worked pretty good. Let's see what we can do to better that. So they picked up. Now this is a 30-06 cartridge, but I can just imagine that that our guys were picking these things up off the ground after they were being shot at, and bringing it back home and saying, can you come up with something that will beat this stupid thing? And because we're getting our clocks cleaned. That's how that progressed, and that's how the 45 Model 1911 was also. That's what initiated that introduction as well. Well, there was an international crisis of sorts, because we had gone and done something which was naughty. If you take open up the page here, if you take a 7x57 Mauser case, you look at the dimension of the head, 0.473. That was the dimension of the Mauser head, and then a little while after that we came up with the 30-06 cartridge, and look at the head dimension on that, 0.473. Same exact thing. Well, these things get noticed, and the Germans sued us in international court for damages, for infringement on their rifle design and infringement on their excellent cartridge design, and so they were awarded damages, but World War I broke out and got in the way of that that settlement. So we basically we ran off with one heck of a good rifle, and we ran off with one heck of a good ammunition design. So, and that that just follows. That just follows with anything in the industry. If you know, if you have something that works, you know, why change it? Why mess around and try to reinvent something that's already working just ducky? So engineers are just as lazy as anybody else. You know, if somebody's telling them, you know, this thing really works wonderfully, can you make something that works better? And the engineer will say, sure. Well, what's the logical thing to do? Lengthen it, you know. And he says, if I lengthen it, how much can I lengthen it and stick in that rifle? Well, you know, we're copying the Mauser rifle, and you know, you can stick a cartridge this. I can lengthen it by about 1/4 of an inch and still fit it in that rifle. Is that okay with you, General? That's beautiful, yeah. Can you get it to shoot faster than that thing that was shooting us? Yeah, I can. So that's what they did. That's how the 30-06 was invented. I'm not there. Nobody knows. You know, those people are long gone. But that's the logic that goes along with anything. Anybody who's hand loading, who's making a wildcat, the best thing to do is to just keep on lengthening what you already have as long as you can, and still fit it into the gun. So, to go back to the naming, process, the naming process had nothing to do with the military. The military was not hyphenating the term 3003 and 3006 Springfield. Those were industrial commercial names that were given to a sporting cartridge. They use these long highfalutin names. You know, even if they have a ballpoint pen, I'm sure it's a long highfalutin name. So it was ball cartridge, 30 U.S. government, model of 1903, and then subsequently model of 1906. That's the way they make the stencils. You know, when they're stenciling of the crates. So it was never called the 3003, and it was never called the 3006, and nothing could have been developed off of a cartridge that was only in existence in arsenals and armories of the military for less than a year. And commercial manufacturers do not hand load ammunition. They make ammunition from scratch. Whatever the head stamp goes on that is what they made from the very beginning. They never reform brass. What they do is they standardize on things that they already have for production efficiency and for reduction of costs and manpower. So, you know, in all things, whether it's, you know, the manufacturing of window cranks in a 1950 Buick that goes into a 1950 Chevy or a 1950 Cadillac or Pontiac, it's the same sort of concept as standardization. So when the 473 diameter standard became popular in the factory, it was, you know, a lot of things were made off of this, that same standard. From about here back, there's a lot of cartridges that look identical. You know, you're talking about over 25 commercial cartridges that have been made with that same basic form. Even with the 45 auto is not much different than the 3006 size case. So there's a couple of thousands of a difference, but that's all. But you're talking about the ability of a factory to be able to cup and draw a multitude of brass, a lot of different cases, you know, 243, 22, 250, 308, 280, 270, 2506. They're all on the same 473 head standard. So the cup and draw process is the taking of brass coin, you know, that's stamped out of sheet brass, and then progressively punching it in a press which draws it out. It's a long drawn out process, literally, and is drawn out progressively, one stamping after another, and it has to keep going back to the furnace and getting re-annealed to soften it again for the next drawing process. Well, they can get a lot of different calibers out of that same progression of you know, cup and drawing, until they can finally, depending on the amount of brass they start out with, they can end up with this. And that's the longest case that you can fit into a standard length rifle receiver that's being made customarily in this country and abroad. So that's That's the standard, which also is followed by, you know, in the European industry too. You know, they have their own cartridges which use this. They use the same head dimension and same standard. So you know that's a very popular style. So when I say Winchester took the 3006 and they necked it down, I was only speaking figuratively. They did not take a 3006 cartridge and neck it down. I'm sure that their R&D people were probably had a loading press, and they probably were, you know, trying out their new invention on a loading press by literally taking 3006 brass and necking it down into what they wanted and test it. But that was the process. But from that point on, everything moves away from the concept of reforming brass. They have that initial casing that's got a straight wall, and it finally goes into the last processing where the neck diameter and the shoulder is formed, and then it has to be trimmed. Now they can trim it to any particular length they want. The actual measurements of the 3003 don't even come. The so-called 3003, I'm using the same slang myself because it's easy to slip into. It's a lot easier to say that than that long stupid name that the military wanted to use. So the 3006 cartridge was shortened by 7/100 or 70,000ths of an inch from the original 1903 cartridge version. Well, if you take that, let's see if I get my calculator here. If you take 2.494, which is the current case, 2.494 plus 0.07 70,000ths equals 2.564. Now 2.564 has absolutely nothing to do with the 270 case, which is 2.540. See if I got that right. 2.540. I've been loading these things and trimming them for so many years that, so 2.540 has nothing to do with that number there. So and that's a moot point. Like I say, arms manufacturers, ammo manufacturers, they couldn't care less what another case measurement is. They make them and they trim them whatever they want. It's all up to them. The reason why Winchester made this case the length it made it is because it was working in the 3006. It fit into a 3006 rifle action, and everything about it was just fine. The only thing they wanted to do was they wanted to make a cartridge that would not be fit easily into a 3006 rifle, because when you measure the outside dimension of that case, the case neck, it measures 0.308. 308. That's a number which is very curious. Well, I'm sure that was done purposely, because that means that case will bang into the rifling of a 30 caliber bore. So that's it. So mathematically, it doesn't fit the model. On a practical basis, it's ridiculous, because Winchester didn't reform the ammunition. They make the ammunition from scratch. They can make it whatever they want. They standardized based on the rifle design that they were working with that was popular, and they were also standardizing based on the production of the brass. That's all. That's the reason. So if you're going to say that the 270 was based on anything, it was based on the 7x57 or the 8mm Mauser. That's what they're really based upon. So that's all. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and God bless.